Our world is changing. It's time for fresh ideas and new points of view. I'm Yana Peel, Global Head of Arts and Culture at Chanel. And this is Chanel Connects, bringing together creative game changers from film, art, dance, music, and more.
Can you hear me, Charles?
Yeah, I can.
Hi, Emerald.
Hey, it's so nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you, John.
Great to finally meet you, Annika.
Thanks for having us.
Some are old friends and collaborators. Others are meeting for the first time. All are focused on what matters most and what's coming next. And now we get to listen in.
Could you tell where my head was at when you found me? Me and you went to hell and back just to find peace.
In this episode, Diane Solway, Head of Arts and Culture Programs at Chanel, moderates a conversation between Kennedy Yanko and Honey Dijon. Kennedy Yanko is a New York-based artist who makes visceral abstract sculptures from paint skin and scrap metal. In 2021, she was artist in residence at the Rubell Museum in Miami, where she presented her latest exhibition, White Passing, a reference to her biracial heritage. For the exhibition, Kennedy scoured the scrapyards of South Florida, salvaging mangled shipping containers and combining them with supple, brightly colored paint skins to create remarkable hanging sculptures that play with texture, weight, and form. Kennedy connects with DJ and producer Honey Dijon, known for her high-energy sets fusing classic disco with techno and house. Honey grew up on Chicago's South Side. She honed her craft in the underground clubs of New York and is now one of the most in-demand DJs on the scene. Playing major festivals, art fairs, and fashion shows around the world, Honey clocks up millions of views for her sets on YouTube, and as a Black trans woman in the world of dance music, she is an inspiration to many and aims to be a mirror of affirmation. Here, Honey and Kennedy discuss sampling the culture.
Kennedy and Honey, it is absolutely thrilling to have you both with us today. Welcome to Chanel Connects. Kennedy, you're here in New York with me. We just walked over from your studio across the street. How would you describe that space that we were just in?
My magical land, the studio, my paradise in the basement in Bushwick. I have my sculptures there, and I have my little studio area with my table and my couch, and I have a few different studios. One's for paint skins, one's for metal, and working through the pieces, and then one is where I kind of spend more time observing it. So we were spending time in my observation room.
And Honey, where are you speaking to us from? Set the scene.
Yes, I'm coming to you from Berlin, Germany. I'm currently sitting in my studio/kitchen table. And I have my library in front of me, so it's actually where I do most of my creative work is from my kitchen table. I know it's very cliche, but
no, it's wonderful.
True.
And I think everyone around the world has been working from their kitchen table for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, it's fantastic to be with both of you. And I know you guys have met briefly in Berlin, but I'm really excited to bring you both together in conversation today. And I wanted to start by asking you both about your early experiences with art and music. And it sounds like you both had very supportive parents. How did you both get started? Honey, do you want to take that first?
Wow. Well, it's very funny that you ask that question when I think about the course of my life. My parents had me when they were very young. So they were party parents, basically. And I think, at the time that I grew up, in a pretty typical African-American household, music was a constant. Music was when you went to the grocery store, the radio. Music was when you cleaned the house. Music was when we had dinner together. So music was sort of very much a big part of my childhood. And I think that's where I fell in love with music and sharing music with others. It wasn't until I got into my teenage years that I was born, or I came of age at the beginning of house music culture in Chicago. House music was born in Chicago, and it was a subculture pretty much within African-American, queer, gay scene. And like most subcultures, clothing and art played a big part of self-expression. That's how you identified your tribe. was how you dressed, what record store you shopped at, what club you went to, what music you listened to. So my earliest connection was always through just being part of a subculture. And also, my favorite bands, my icons are Grace Jones and Sade, and they're both fashion icons. And I would just stare at the album covers while I listened to the albums. And night clubbing was really inspirational for me because the jacket was by Giorgio Armani, and the graphics and photography was by Jean-Paul Goude. And Sade, whenever I would see her album covers, or one of them specifically was by Helmut Newton. She used to wear a lot of Gaultier. And so
Right.
fashion and art and photography I've never had a separation or a division of any of those things. They all sort of played with one another. And so there was always this sort of obsession with all artistic expressions for me.
Tell me, I just wanted to go back to your parents for a second because I know
Yeah.
you mentioned that they were party parents and
They were party
sort of-
parents. Yeah.
And they kind of gave you the floor when it came to music. So tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so my parents used to have basement parties. And they always started past my bedtime. My mother's going to kill me when she hears this. But, after bedtime, I would sneak and sit on the edge of the stairs and listen to the music and the laughter and the clanking of glasses. And it becomes this atmosphere that I sounded so exciting and full of life and vibrant. And I think that was my introduction to nightlife as a child. But also my mom used to let me play records an hour before my bedtime at the beginning of the night. And so I think that's where now there's a professional term for that. It's called a selector. But back then I was just sharing music or playing music that I loved and sharing it with my parents. And so I think that was the introduction for my lifelong career as a musician.
Kennedy, what about you? What about your parents and your introduction to the world of culture? And did you get that early access?
Yeah, I did. I was always around art in some way. My dad's a painter and an architect, and my mom's a writer. And so they were very, they were a little different though. They were kind of conservative in a strange way, and they were also bohemian in a strange way. And there was always some kind of weird balancing act between those two things that they would always ride. And I don't know if that's more because of just how they wanted to live their lives and what they were willing to do for their art, or if they really cared for their art. I always call my dad a lazy painter, because he goes in there, he messes around, does a little thing. But, we spent so much time talking about the formal aspects of art and making and the process. And, for me, from a really young age, painting immediately became a place for me to kind of just be able to explore in a way that is fully for myself and in myself. And I think as a younger person, I was just always kind of exploring. I was studying Man Ray, I was studying the Surrealists, I was studying the Expressionists, and I was really interested in kind of like counterculture and rock and roll. And I was 12 years old. And I'm a fellow Midwesterner, honey. I'm from Missouri.
Oh, wow. We're neighbors.
Yeah.
We're neighbors.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Howdy.
Howdy. Howdy, neighbor.
So, yeah, I mean, and it is interesting, too, kind of being from the Midwest, how, there's so many melding pots of different things, different East Coast, West Coast, all different parts of the world coming together. And then also kind of coming from 6 generations on both sides of laborers, and there's this kind of, in my genetic code, this sense of repetition and creating and making and going through that process that serves me in some way.
I would agree with that. I think, coming from Chicago, it was such a musically diverse city. You had the blues, you had jazz, you had disco, new wave, house music, industrial clubs, gay clubs, black gay clubs, white gay clubs. And I sort of, my education was so vast because, you sort of move between all these worlds. And I think the Midwest, also growing up there keeps me really grounded. Which I really love. I can sort of, when I go back, everyone is really happy for what I've achieved in my life, but they're also like, but we still don't get too big for your britches, which is really nice.
We don't really care.
Yeah, they don't care. It's like, if like my mother, like when I walked in the Off-White show, she's like, oh yeah, you look really nice. Are you coming home for my birthday? Sort of like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like, but mom, this is like a big deal. Yeah, I'm really proud of you, but your sister needs you to call her. So,
And and the other thing too might also be, we've both been doing this. You've been doing this forever, so they're like used to you doing it, right? Like you've got another show.
But there were many times when especially at the beginning, when I wasn't at the level that I am now. I was like, well, mom, it's it's really hard. I'm not sure. Well, you can always get a job with benefits. That was always the job with benefits conversation. And so,
Not the
I just
benefits.
think, they just come from a generation where, like my parents were, middle class. So they, they worked. And so they just wanted to make sure that I was okay.
Honey, was there a particular moment, a record, a party, a moment when you sort of thought, this is actually what I want to do, even if you didn't specifically know it was DJing? Was there something about that world that convinced you that's what I want to do?
Well, okay. So I remember it specifically, and it's one of the most memorable experiences of my life, and it's probably going to sound really strange to a lot of people. But so a lot of the early music house parties were held in Catholic high schools and roller rinks. And I remember I was a dancer before I became a DJ, and I just loved to dance. And actually, one of the biggest influence of me, we had this video station in Chicago called MV60, and that's where I saw the New Puritans by Michael Clark dancing to The Fall.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, so
Amazing.
that was like, oh my God, I want to dance like that. And so I used to go to these parties, and I would have to do this free form style dancing based on that, combined with house dancing and all this sort of stuff. And I got so into the music that I had an out of body experience, and I could literally physically see myself. It was very transcendental that I could see myself dancing. Like I was above myself, but I could see myself because it's the weirdest thing. And I remember saying to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it or what this means, but I want to be a part of this the rest of my life.
Wow, that's amazing.
I've been watching your Boiler Room perform. I've been listening to it while I've been in the studio all week.
Thank you.
And the one thing that I can't help but embrace is that the transient state of the way that you allow and create space for a really intense energy.
Well, it's so interesting because we're both alchemists in a way. We both take existing materials, or I use, in your case, metal or found objects, and in my case, other people's music. And I put it together in my own way, and it becomes something new. I always say that I'm just a vessel for the universe. I have learned, Martha Graham had one of the best quotes that I live by. It's not your place to judge the work, it's your place to do the work. And so I always feel like I'm an extension and an expression of the universe, so I don't get in its way. I just let it do what it does. And I always say all the hardships as well as the wonderful moments in my life have all played a part in allowing that energy to come through me. I don't believe anything of my creative talent I own. I'm a really great editor. I'm a really great sampler. That is my skill set of taking all these different people and inspirations that have inspired me, and I put them together in my own unique way. And that's mine. But it's just energy that's going through me now. Then after I'm not here, someone else will have that energy in their unique way. So I really just let the universe do its work. And I'm just glad that I got chosen for this particular expression.
We're talking about, in this conversation, sampling culture. And there is so much crossover here between the two of you. And, Kennedy, you studied theater and yoga, bodybuilding, many kinds of art history. And you've likened the way you work to choreography, which I loved. We were just in your studio and you were talking about how there's a certain kind of choreography with the way you use materials, but also mix them, bend them, twist them, make them do what you want them to do. And I wonder, it's just sort of in relation to what Honey was just talking about, if you could elaborate a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting speaking with people working in sound, specifically within process. There's just so many overlaps conceptually in our practice, but I think visually in my work, I'm playing with scale and form and really how people are absorbing it and taking it in. So I'm constantly challenging your ability to know what the materiality is. So for instance, one of my materials is paint. So I'm literally pouring paint and I'm using paint as a sculptural material, which is not a typical way to use that medium. But when you look at it, you can't tell if it's metal, if it's soft, if it's hard or heavy or light. So there's so much for me in my interest of kind of going through the process of building, of making, of editing, and kind of bringing everything together. There's so much about connecting to that receptive energy. And there's also kind of this back and forth between the metal and the skin and myself. So there's always this dialogue that's happening with these two other materials.
Can you talk a little bit, just for our listeners who are new to your work, could you talk a little bit about paint skins?
Yes. So in 2009, I did a show called Wu Wei, which means to allow. And I was pouring paint onto canvas. And I was getting these beautiful fractal-like details from the way the paint would interact with itself. And in that moment, I realized that the medium will show me where I need to go next, because I was getting these miraculous details by almost removing myself in a way from the work. So the paint skins developed over a series of 10 years, and it's a process of pouring paint. It's all latex based, which is a really fascinating material because once it's shaped and formed, it has this porous quality to it, and it kind of slumps and it adheres to itself and to the metal. So there's this moment of inception. So my work has always had this sense of expansion and contraction. And for me, that language or that idea or that feeling is really the impetus of the signaling for me. If I expand, it's a yes. And if I contract, it's a no. And that's kind of how I'm navigating or using some kind of criteria for myself as a maker.
Honey, I'm just following on that. You're also mixing materials, you're mixing sounds, musical textures. Mm-hmm. You're kind of choreographing the energy of the space and the night and reading the room at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel when you're DJing? What's going through your head? How are you adjusting the work to the room, or do you do that?
What am I thinking about depends on the energy of the room and the connectivity with the audience. I'm a proper New York DJ where we play from the opening to the end, and you're storytelling basically. And you're setting the room up, you're getting the energy correct depending on where you are. And I love that part of the process because I get to sort of bounce around and be very playful with music and with soundscapes. And speaking about alchemy, if you've ever been to one of my sets, I love effects. I love reverb, delay, echo. That comes from, putting drama and also space and putting a lot of spatial silence in music. Silence is just another tool to use within music. So for me, what I'm trying to do is to just letting each song have a thread and an emotion, and it's basically like sex, really. There's the courting, and then there's the foreplay, and then we get into a little bit of heavy situations, and then there's the ebb and flow. Then we bring it down, and then we bring it back up, and it's not a destination, but it's more of it's tantric basically. It's not about the orgasm, it's about the pleasure. And so what I try to do when I'm DJing is just really connect with people on a very primal level. Tension and release is a big thing for me, building, and then giving that release. Sort of the same thing that you were saying earlier, Kennedy. Contracting and expanding, I call it tension and release. And, I try to have as much tension before the release. And then letting that release happen. It's euphoric, it's sexual, it's energetic, and then you start to tease again. It's fun for me. It's like really great sex.
I've always felt that. I've always felt that creative energy is maybe one of the closest forms to spiritual energy. And when I think about, the physical expression of my work, it's almost like capturing that exact moment that you're talking about in stillness.
Yeah, getting back to the question of what am I thinking about, it's really, I try not to think. And that's one of the things I love about being a live performer is that this moment is the only moment we're going to have to do this. And I think there's something really beautiful about being so present in that moment.
Right, because like any live performance, it can't be repeated.
It
It's
can't be
always,
repeated.
You're either there or you miss it, even if it's recorded.
And you're also forced into it.
You're also
You're
forced.
kind of put into that
Yeah.
state versus kind of like having to get your brain into the present.
Can I ask you a question? So about your paint skins, was this an accidental discovery? Because I find that there are no such things as mistakes. There's just discoveries.
Definitely accidental. Definitely one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Yeah. I mean, so getting back to your boiler room that you talk about. So
Yes.
that day was very special. Special in being I had been in Australia for 2 weeks. It was an intense, grueling 2-week tour. And it was the last gig on the tour. And the flight was late. The car to pick me up was 45 minutes late. I went straight from the airport, straight to drop my bags off, and was thrust in front of 4,000 people. Just thrust. And my entire life showed up in that 1 hour. Like every lesson that I learned showed up in that 1 hour. That's not my favorite DJ set of mine. I can go back and look at 50,000 mistakes within that set, but it connected with so many people. And I realized from that moment on that it's not about being perfect. You just always have to keep going in the process because you never know. You just never know within your creative work what's going to stick and what's not going to stick. And it was the 1 hour out of everything I've done in my life that changed for me. So I learned in that process that not to get in its way, and there are no such things as mistakes, just discoveries.
But also it's interesting that, you had done all the work. And so you're really in that moment of having to just do rather than to think about it. You had already done it. So you were just relying on what you know and how you do that so well. So it was just, I think that's always interesting when you're sometimes forced into those situations where you just have to literally perform.
Yeah.
What's the craziest night you've ever DJ'd? Paint the scene for us.
The craziest night that I've had a lot of crazy nights.
Does it feel crazy to you?
I think I have to say playing at Panorama Bar in Berghain is probably some of the best highlights of my life because it's really for music lovers and it's a den of inequity. Is that what they call it? A very carnal, lustful,
Yes.
free place. And that's why I love it so much. And, one of the things that I would have to say, seeing women dancing topless and freely, sexually free without worrying about the male gaze or heterosexual norms. I think women, when they're in spaces, always have to worry about male aggressive energy. And one of the great things about Panorama Bar is that it's a queer space, and it's sort of the reason that the door scene is so legendary about people not getting in is because they just want to make sure that the right people are there so that no one gets in anyone's way as far as expressing themselves. And I found it really beautiful to see women so free with their bodies. And it was just really awesome to see all people just being free and celebratory. And it was, they put a lot of fog in the room and there's lots of strobes going, and most of the colors of the strobes are very sexual orange and red. And, it was, I remember like 9 a.m, but all the shutters were closed. And as soon as, if you've ever been to Panorama Bar, if you've been partying for 13 hours and the shutters comes up and the sunlight comes in, it's like euphoria. So I would have to say those were some of the most incredible DJ experiences that I've had, is just seeing people be able to express themselves without fear and shame and to just celebrate who they are unapologetically.
Kennedy, I know you spent 3 years with the Living Theater. 4 years. Kennedy's gesturing for, which is New York's oldest experimental theater group. And you worked with the founder, Judith Malina, early in your career when you first moved to New York. What did that experience teach you about building a community?
I think to begin with, it taught me a lot about myself in relationship to others. So as a painter, it's such a private, isolated world, which is not my practice now. My practice is very different working in sculpture. But at that time, I don't think that I had been properly socialized in a lot of ways, just from maybe the way I was brought up. But, it taught me how to support people and how to make space for people. It taught me how to support myself in spaces like that too, when I didn't know how to. But I think more than anything, being in a commune that was specifically focused on incubating ideas and building art versus, making a farm or something like that. It was fascinating because we had so many different kinds of minds there. We had writers and music producers and actors and performers, and it was just this kind of enclave of people really pushing for things that don't make sense in the constitution of this world that we've been given. So I think that showed me the power of a collective energy.
Were there any sort of formative experiences with the Living Theater that you remember in terms of other people who came through or other exposure to other interesting artists?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody was there. Al Pacino paid our rent. Yoko Ono helped with our rent. I mean, who else would come by? I met Rick Lowe at the Living Theater, who's a wonderful artist. I met Penny Arcade, who's a legendary performer from the Lower East Side. Yeah. So it was this true Lower East Side, New York, and all the old school people were still showing up to the Living Theater. So, I mean, every corner had a different thing going on,
I miss the eccentric New Yorker.
It's still no. You know what? It's still a real thing. I mean, it's still there. It's here, but it's maybe not the same. I just find that I personally too. I have like a resistance to being able to be open to what might be the newer version of that. Right. Because you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm not looking for the newer version of that New York. That's one of the reasons why I moved to Berlin, because I didn't want to be one of those New Yorkers. Oh my God, it was so great. I didn't want to be that, because New York is constantly evolving, and New York will always be New York in whatever incarnation that is. And, what is now? What is next in New York? The new generation coming up, especially in the queer scene, is so exciting. And I'm interested to see what this new New York will be. There's still so many amazing New Yorkers still there. And so when you spoke about Penny Arcade, it just brought up so many memories of so many amazing people that I've come into contact along the way that are still, like Lady Bunny's still in New York, and Taboo is still in New York. But you're right, it's about what's now. And I'm so excited to see what New York, especially post-pandemic, becomes.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about now. And Kennedy, could you talk a little bit about your exhibition, White Passing, at the Rubell Museum in Miami, which is a wonderful, fascinating show where you really pushed yourself in new ways. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you were exploring.
Yeah, delighted to. Yes, the building of this work and this process internally has been really challenging, really interesting for me. So, when I went to the Rubell residency to build that work, I had the whole old museum. So it was the old DEA building, which was over 30,000 square feet to work in.
So this is an old DEA building that was turned into a museum.
And I had never had that kind of space before. I never had a forklift. I never had a scissor lift. And when I was down there, for me at that time, I was really just trying to make the work happen. I'd never worked at that scale. So there was a lot of nuanced engineering that I was kind of learning and figuring out in real time. And at the same time, I've been writing this graphic novel for the last year and a half. And it's called Indelible Fluidity. And it goes through different parts of my life and different obstacles within my personhood, and then also kind of like genetically how I'm connecting to how information is coming through genetically in different ways. And it's the main thing in the book is showing that adversity is the conduit to consciousness, that when you're faced with an obstacle, it's what causes you to go deeper within yourself to understand how to navigate that space more thoroughly. And I had to interrogate, my personhood and my identity in a way that I never had before, looking at my skin, looking at my eyes, looking at my hair, what it means to be a white passing biracial person raised by a Black American mother and a white American father. and kind of like how I'm contributing and what kind of space I'm taking up and what kind of space I'm creating for other people. And I think one of the most fascinating things in building this work is that just understanding even more deeply about how particular and odd and nuanced my perceptual experience has been as how I'm understanding the world and how the world is understanding me. And I think in my work, I'm always looking to see how I can challenge that lack of sight and that lack of vision. And I'm always interested in encouraging people and challenging myself in being able to more deeply understand vision as a full body experience versus something that I understand.
Can you also talk a little bit about the work that you created for that show? Because I know you were working on a much bigger scale than you had ever worked in before.
So I had set a couple weeks aside for scavenging for metal. So basically with my process, I spend a lot of time just hunting for the materials that I'm looking for. So we're driving around and I found this amazing shipping container that I'd been wanting to work with this material for years because the spines of the shipping containers are really structural and strong. And then the other metal on it is this kind of malleable, soft, flimsy metal that has this incredible expression that you can only find from the thinner steels. It gets these beautiful curls and wrinkles, and it had these wonderful colors on it. So the biggest one stands, I think over 20 feet tall, and I used over 100 gallons of paint for the paint skins.
Wow.
So in having that kind of space to work in, I was able to scale up in every way, and I learned a new technique that has significantly changed the way that the skins are expressing themselves.
You've talked a lot about finding metal for your sculptures in these sort of wild-sounding scrap yards across the U.S. Could you tell us a little bit more about those expeditions and are they dangerous? Are they what does that entail?
Well, it all started, but really no. I think it all really did start from a really young age, and my painting practice has always been an action painting. So that means that I'm responding in the moment, I'm working quite aggressively, and it's very physical and automatic. So when I'm looking for the materials, I'm involving myself in completely a very different environments. So while I'm going to the yards, it's me and Jewel, and we're in the Sprinter truck, and we're driving around. We go to Philly and Baltimore. And so on the I don't know if you've ever been in a metal yard before.
No,
but
tell me what that expedition is like.
It's basically like walking into the apocalypse. You're walking into this space. There's 30 feet tall of metal. There are these huge dinosaur machines, picking metal up with a magnet and throwing it up onto the pile. And then there's all these cars that are unloading metal. And, half the time that I'm going to these places, I'm not allowed to go into them because I can be a liability to the yards. And every once in a while, I find a good one and someone who's excited about seeing something different that they haven't, all day long. And I love being able to kind of just dig and look. And most of the time I can only, get things that are around the edges because it's kind of dangerous to get in there. But sometimes I have, guys that will help me with the machines. And a lot of the main manipulation of the materials happen there in real time. So there's one machine, I can't think of the name of it, but it kind of crushes it like a large Tyrannosaurus Rex. And it's so fascinating as I've continued this relationship with metal to understand it as this soft thing that when I heat it up, it becomes liquid, or when I can pinch it and it almost breaks as like a twig. And for me in those moments, everything that I know is over. And the adrenaline of being in the yard and to get to experience that and absorb all that, that's really kind of what keeps me going and that I enjoy.
Sounds amazing. Honey, I'm thinking also that as Kennedy's describing these kind of treasure hunts and, looking for those elements, but I'm curious how you source material and if record shops or other vintage kinds of stores, what are some of the other sources that you're looking at?
The thing about being a working DJ is that it's constant research, it's constant navigation. One of the great things about living in Berlin is that there's still a very big culture of vinyl. And so there's lots of secondhand resales of record collections. There's an e-commerce site called Discogs where you can pretty much find any record that you've been looking for in your life there. A lot of times it would be I'll be shopping and I'll hear a disco record and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Or I'll be, I go everywhere from YouTube to record shops to promos to my own record crates to memories to friends making things specifically for me. I actually have an engineer that works with me that can make edits for me on the fly. I recently did a remix of David Bowie's Let's Dance, and that mix was inspired by hearing one of my favorite DJs at a club. And so you're talking about a lifetime of music that I'm pulling from.
Right.
And it's
all filtered through experience, right? Because
and
so
it's
much
all
about-
I didn't have the words for my art until someone said it was experiential. And so a lot of times the research comes literally just from just digging, and then I'll be asleep and something will pop in my head, and then I'll be on this mad scavenger hunt for something that, maybe a riff or a vocal, and I call my friends so it's constant research. And I recently started collecting 7 inches about 3 or 4 years ago because everything now is moving so digital. And even I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about NFTs? How do you feel about inanimate artistic things? Because in one way I can see the appeal of it, but I feel like, no, this isn't how we should experience. Art should be physical for me.
Well, I don't think NFTs have anything to do with art.
Okay.
To begin with.
I just want to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
As someone that works in the physical realm,
I guess my feel on it is that, it's another parallel industry and community versus a competition or a replacement. And with the NFTs, I honestly think that artists were kind of like used to popularize the idea of it as an application more than as an art thing, just in my experience in making them or kind of like understanding that world a little bit more. Right. It's an asset. It's a money thing.
To what degree do you guys think about how you present yourself and how you present yourself as being part of your practice?
You want to go first with that, Kennedy?
I was just going to say the same to you. I'll start.
What do you want people to know about with your work, about you?
I think, that's the thing with me is that, my work is really kind of the amalgamation of my life experience as in each different iteration that I'm creating it in. When I think about my work, I think of it really as my higher self and really as the fullest expression of myself. And I really feel that it's much more sophisticated than I am as a person. I'm trash. I really am. To be honest, I'm trash. I learn a lot from my work. And so, for me, it's always about how am I interacting? How am I feeling while I'm talking with you? How am I feeling while I'm looking at this? Mm-hmm. So I think that translates into the work, and I really believe that you can feel it breathing in front of you from that.
Honey, what about you? What do you want people to know about you listening to one of your sets when they're in the room with you?
I would probably say I'm a proponent of joy, and I'm sort of a griot in the sense of the word. So I hope people, when they come to hear me play, because, for many years, I wasn't hired because I played too eclectic. I would jump from disco to techno to this to that and the other, and people couldn't put me in a box. And now I'm celebrated for that because that's how I experienced it. I think most people present their work the way they were sort of exposed to something the first time. And so I hope the way I'm presenting myself as an artist is just basically a continuation of an art form, or I believe to be an art form that has been lost. And especially with all of this digital innovation, we have all the technologies for music to basically mix itself. And so I try to still present music in a way that is still rooted in that time, because I don't want it to get lost. It was too incredible. I experienced so many incredible things. So, and also sharing. I think that's another important word, just to share. And so that's what I hope people take away from when they come to see me perform.
I'd love to wrap things up by looking ahead to one of your exciting upcoming plans. You're going to be working with Grace Jones.
Oh, my God.
As part of her curated festival Meltdown at London's South Bank Centre. So let's just talk about Grace Jones for a second.
Casually.
So what does Grace mean to you, and how did this come about?
Oh, my God. I'm still speechless because I'm such a fan. first and foremost. I'm a fan that gets to work with someone that has been truly inspirational for me. But if I think about Grace and sort of what she's liberated me, and I have this thing called mirror of affirmation. And like, you don't know that you can be something if you can't see it. And Grace was combined theater and performance art and fashion. And here was this dark-skinned woman that wasn't traditionally femininely beautiful, but was so strikingly beautiful. And she broke down gender norms and what it meant to be masculine and feminine. And then you had this Jamaican woman singing Edith Piaf, La Vie en Rose. And so for me, it's a full circle moment. And I often joke like, okay, after this, I can retire. There's still a lot of work to do.
What can we expect from your performance with her? Or your appearance with her, rather?
Well, first of all, I'm just worried about my appearance as Grace, so I have to really be on point. So the first thing is like, what am I going to wear?
And have you solved it?
Oh, yeah, I've solved that riddle. I have to be correct for that one. I've solved that riddle.
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been a wonderful opportunity to talk to you both and bring you both together. Honey, I think Kennedy and I will see you soon in London.
Yes, awesome.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you guys so much. This was really a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I hope it was thrilling as a roller coaster ride.
Invigorating.
As always, yes.
Thank you for listening to Chanel Connects. Don't forget, you can follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app. You can also listen back to Season 1, featuring conversations between Pharrell Williams and Ez Devlin, Keira Knightley and Lulu Wang, and many more.